Was there a plan to work out the order, or you're just going to go in any order you want?
But Tawanda is in charge of it.
Okay, well, Tawanda.
Greetings to you all who have joined us from across Zimbabwe, the region, the continent, in all corners of our world where we have Zimbabweans in the diaspora. Today we are looking at the media capture in Zimbabwe, and as Surface Trust Policy Dialogue Forum, we are pleased to be hosting and collaborating with our partners, the Information for Development Trust, specifically Tawanda Majoni, who's the director, and who has put this together. It's their forum, really. The topic is theirs. The choice of panelists is theirs. We are happy to be collaborating with them. I'm also, therefore, my job is really to introduce Tawanda Majoni, who used to be one of my staffers, one of the senior staffers at the Zimbabwe Mirror many years ago, when we were much older than we are now. I'm glad to see that he's still in the field, fighting, hustling. So, Tawanda, it's to you now. It's your show. Please carry on.
Okay, great thanks to you, Dr. Mandaza, for breaking the ice into the conversation that we are going to shortly get into today. And I would like to start by thanking all those people who have responded to our call to all this dialogue from across the globe. As I can see from the list of participants here, we have participants, listeners, delegates from different parts of the world, actually, not only just Zimbabwe. So that's a very, very encouraging thing. And for us as IDT, this is very important because the issue of media capture, which is the dialogue, which is a very important, really, discussion to have as part of our citizen dialogue towards enhancing, promoting, encouraging advocacy for better governance here in Zimbabwe, in Southern Africa, and from our little corner, you know, towards even the rest of the world. As I say this, and before we get into the usual protocol, usual ritual of introducing our panelists, let me just try to give this conversation some brief context. As Dr. Mandaza has already said, this is a collaboration between Information for Development Trust and Surface Trust. IDT actually initiated the idea about discussing media capture in Zimbabwe, trying to unpack media capture, trying to understand what media capture is all about, and then ultimately to see whether, as citizens of Zimbabwe, as citizens of Southern Africa, as citizens of the world, we can do something towards stemming this growing problem. It's actually a growing problem in Zimbabwe. So this is briefly the context within which we are going to discuss the phenomenon of media capture. At IDT, we are seized with the mandate to promote access to information around governance in the public sector, in the private sector, as governance relates to transparency, accountability, and integrity. So therefore, this is a very befitting topic, and we said, okay, let's try to do some kind of self-introspection. Not exactly self-introspection, but partly so, because coming from the media, we really need to understand what's happening in terms of the control, the deliberate control, you see, the deliberate direction, the deliberate manipulation of the media or media content into the public sphere. Because obviously there are agencies that are involved at various levels within various nuances relating to media capture. You have governments, or in this particular case, since we're discussing the issue of Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwean government would have to debate whether or not the Zimbabwean government is involved in media capture. Politicians from the ruling party, politicians from the opposition, are they involved in media speak? Systems, whether those are going to be public systems or private systems. Commerce, what is the role of commerce in all this that we are going to look at? So this is the importance of that, because we are situating everything, we are locating everything within the broader context of transparency, accountability, and integrity in governance, both in the public sector and in the private sector and the public sector. So for us, this is a very important subject to discuss. And one thing I think we need to really acknowledge without soliciting for opinions is the fact that media capture, unlike the others, you see, when you walk to the other side of the room, you got state capture there. When you place state capture and media capture in the same room, you're going to come up with very interesting observations, very intriguing observations. Now, as an example, let me just focus attention on particular institutions. The media itself, one. The legislature, two. Media scholarship, three, as in research. And then we've got the professional researchers outside the scholarly researchers. If you then try to compare the energy, the conviction, the commitment, the loyalty to both types of capture, you are bound to notice some very interesting things, and I'm going to name just maybe one as a way of exciting debate, later on, when we give the baton to our panelists and the floor. You notice that where state capture is concerned, the media is very energetic about exposing state capture, which is very encouraging, very positive, very progressive, right? The legislature, as an example, you take the Public Accounts Committee. It's very, very committed to exposing and analyzing the nuances that define state capture. Media scholars are doing the same thing from within Zimbabwe and from outside Zimbabwe, but around Zimbabwe. But when you shift then your attention to the other corner of the room and you're looking at media capture, I think there won't be much zest to dispute the fact that there's minimal energy, minimal commitment, even from the media itself, to unpack media capture, to expose media capture. That's the media. Civil society, yes, you see ad hoc conversations around media capture, even in civil society, but it's not as faithful, it's not as loyal as you see when you're talking about state capture. And then the same applies with the legislature. The literature review I've done prior in the run-up to this particular conversation on scholarly research, relating to media capture. Seeing that there's a focus on power, there's focus on control, there's focus on regulation, there's focus on ownership. Those four pillars would go towards defining media capture. We are going to have a panelist who is going to talk about media capture in maybe greater detail than this. I'm just putting it across, in passing. Those four pillars would be essential in defining media capture, but you don't see the scholarly researcher doing so much around media capture by specifically focusing attention on what? On media capture. I've seen some scholars who are here. Some of them, we coming a long way together. I don't know whether they are going to agree with this, but this is the opinion that at IDT we have tended to formulate. This is the kind of ground that we've tended to stand on as far as scholarly research is concerned. And then, of course, professional research hasn't done much. It's been very lethargic in terms of trying to expose media capture in Zimbabwe. I haven't looked so much into other countries, other cases and stuff like that. And then the question that you ask at the end of the day is why? I'm sure the panelists who are listening in already and panelists who are going to come, if they are not here already, are going to also try to shed some perspectives, to do some perspectives on that question. Why is it that we got these complex nuances, this complex matrix, but we are not deploying enough or sufficient energy into that debate on media capture? But we are so much excited, so much loyal to the conversation around state capture. So this is the thing. I see that the first panelist, I'm going to, like I said, this is just to give a brief overview on what we are intending to do, and just to cast some light on the conversation in terms of context. Having said that, because you see, in line with our philosophy at IDT, and I know that this is a philosophy that resonates with what's happening at Surface Trust. In line with that philosophy, we believe that we therefore need to train more attention around media capture. This is just a phenomenon, I think, that's emerging in Zimbabwe, but we need to mothball it. We need to mothball it. We need to build some traction around it as a discussion in the citizen arena, in the public sphere. We really need to be looking at those things, and I'm just hoping that this is just a part of a series that's coming later on. All right. So having said that, let me just then get into the protocol to introduce our panelists. Obviously, thanking our delegates. As I thank them, we have spared some time, to listening to this, whether here or on Facebook. We are also on Twitter for this particular conversation. But let me start with some kind of strategic disclaimer. The gender composition of the panel is not what we would have wanted, what we wished for. Actually, we tried so much our best to get as many women on board as possible as part of balancing the gender equation in this particular intervention. But we are happy that we have Patience Rima. Patience Rima is the director at Media Monitors. She is the past chairperson of the Media Alliance of Zimbabwe, and she's got so many years doing advocacy around monitoring of the media. And this is very important to have Patience on board, because when I was talking to her, I said, you know what, there's this very solid but nuanced nexus between media capture and media monitoring, because media capture in essence is that process that seeks to direct the conversation, to direct the narratives, to direct perspectives into the public sphere through certain canals. It defines the canals. It also then tries to define the messages. And then it also seeks to position the audience. That's what media capture in general terms, seeks to do for selfish reasons, of course, whether those are going to be political, whether they're going to be commercial, whether they're going to be religious, whether they're going to be anything else, but this is what a media capture seeks to do in essence. So it's very important because once we have media capture defines, like I would have said, the conversation, the narratives, the reportage and everything. So, and then when people like patients coming on board, they might be guided by the media capture to do their media monitoring, sometimes without even knowing that this is what is there, because there's that complexity within media capture, within the agents of media capture, whether they are politicians, whether they are religious people, whether they are institutions or their systems. There is that deliberate tendency towards flowing information in one direction and away from another direction by way of mostly commission, but also by omission. So where patients remain there, and then my brother, Geoff Nyarota, is a veteran journalist. He's the founder, editor of the Daily News. He doesn't need too much of an introduction from me, especially for generations that within our radar. But he's a media. He's an author too. He has written on the media. He's written biographies of other people, and he's still very active as what I would call a media counselor, so to speak. And then we have Comrade Dumisani Mlea. Dumi is coming from AMH. He spent most of his time at AMH, and I think you would also agree with me. And he held senior positions at AMH. The last position that he held was, I think he was the editor of the Zimbabwe Independent. But Dumi now is running a very robust investigative journalism platform, that is the Newsox. CPIJ, Center for Public Interest Journalism. That's what he's doing. He went with quite a number of guys who are coming from AMH. And then I think, you might be able to make some reflections on media capture, especially because if you remember very well, now I was there, Dr. Manders has said it, and the mirror got captured away from private hands. And it was taken in by the Central Intelligence Organization. That's recorded. Nobody would dispute that. And I was an editor at that particular time. I also left because now I was saying when these guys came on board, I said I don't think I'll be able to work with them. But that's not what I'm going to talk about now. Dumi wrote what we then got to call Mediagate. Mediagate. Referring to the capture of the group mirror of newspapers. The publisher was Dr. Mandaza. I was an editor there at that particular time. But also, I think if he's comfortable with it, Dumi might also want to cast some reflections on the possible or actual capture of the private media, the privately owned media, or the so-called independent media. Then we have Tish Zindoga. Tish Zindoga, a very energetic young media manager, is now running his own digital platform after leaving Zimpapers. And we know Zimpapers is a public news institution. He was an editor there. So we felt that he could enrich the conversation by talking if he so feels about the nuances, dynamics, and everything, within the state media. And then we have Stanley Gama. Stanley Gama is the former group editor at Daily News. I don't know whether the Daily News is the same Daily News today as it was in 2000. But these are things that people like Stanley Gama might be able to cast some reflections on as we proceed with this particular conversation. So then that is it. And then the attitude that we're going to follow now in this particular dialogue is to, because we don't want to give our panelists the excuse to present monologues and then start boring audiences out of it. So as the moderator, what I'm going to do is I will excite conversations into their slots by asking questions first, and then they respond to those questions, and then they respond to questions that I don't ask. And then also participants can come in. It's not a problem. They can raise hands at the particular time. We can then raise the issues that they've raised within the larger domain of this dialogue. So this is how we're going to do it. And then we ask people to remain on mute. If they want to speak, they would do that through raising their hands. And then we'll definitely give them a chance to participate. And then also give questions, feedback, and so forth. All those things are welcome. So just be careful to ensure that you remain on mute. Video, you are free to use video. It's actually more welcome than remaining anonymous. So you can be on video, and then we see you. We'll be very happy to see you. And then, as I just want to mention that if you look at the flyers with Professor Jonathan Moy, is one of our panelists. Yes, he had confirmed participation, but we received communication from him indicating that he is today he is a very tight, overwhelming deadline, something that he's working on, and I'm not going to get into details about that. But he won't be able to start up with us. But our hope is that later you will be able to get into the conversation, and then we can reflect. Because Professor Moyo would be very, very important taking part in this discussion, because former Minister of Information in Zimbabwe. And during his time, lots of things were happening. I don't know whether anybody is going to call it media capture or anything like that, but so many things happened. And he was excited about taking part in this conversation. It's quite unfortunate that there's this intervening disruption on the commitment that he has, with the deadline that he has to deliver today. So without much ado, let me then just get us into the real conversation and ask Mr. Geoff Nyarota to come on board. Mr. Nyarota, you would want to unmute if you are muted, and then do a presentation briefly, at most 20 minutes, on media capture. How do you understand media capture? What is media capture? Who are the agents involved in media capture? Government, politicians, pastors, prophets, who else is involved in media capture? Commerce, the guys who are gonna give you advice, and because you're so poor as a media organization, they say, okay, if you run our advert, then you are not going to run a story against us. Is that what is happening? Mr. Nyarota, can you then come on board and then also give us the methods that they use when they are trying to do media capture? Thank you. I hope Mr. Nyarota is in. I saw him.
Yes.
He's actually in. Yes. Thanks a lot, Mr. Nyarota. Come in.
Thank you very much, Tawanda. Thank you very much to start with for inviting me to this very important discussion. I'm sorry I was delayed as I advised, and I'm sorry that Professor Jonathan Moyo is not with us today. I was anxiously expecting to engage with him at close range after many years of sparring from a distance. So I hope he will be participating. The issue of media capture, the term media capture, in my, excuse me, in my opinion, is something that has come up in recent years, maybe not more than 2 years. We started hearing about media capture. And it is being presented as a brand new phenomenon that has just materialized from somewhere. And we've become so engrossed with trying to unravel the nature, the substance of media capture. But in my opinion, my humble opinion, there is nothing new about media capture. What seems to be happening is a change in terminology in respect of a phenomenon that we've had for quite some time. What we're calling media capture is, in my opinion, no different from control of the media, press control, which we've had for many years, for decades, in fact. But going back to the 80s, in the early years of our independence, if we're talking about the case of Zimbabwe, we have battled, those of us in the media, with a government that was anxious to exert control on the media of Zimbabwe. Starting in the early days when government itself still held a monopoly, an effective monopoly in terms of control of the media. I'm talking here of the days when the media establishment comprised of primarily Zimbabwe newspapers and the ZBC. And these were both government or state control outfits. The only rival or rivals to the government established media, the government controlled media, were essentially the Financial Gazette, which was a very small publication which catered then mainly for white interests. It had a small white readership. Then we also had magazines such as Parade, which was the most popular magazine. We had Motto, and we eventually had Horizon as well. Now, essentially, the magazines posed no serious challenge to the government establishment. That is the mainstream newspapers, the Herald, the Sunday Mail in Harare, the Chronicle, Sunday News in Bulawayo. So, in terms of control, or to use the term that we now using here, in terms of capture, the media, the mainstream media, were effectively captured by the government. They were effectively controlled by the government. And the situation in Zimbabwe, where government was in control of the major media outlets, was the same. It was replicated throughout the region. It was the same case in Zambia. It was the same case in Malawi, Namibia, Mozambique, with the notable exception of South Africa. So the point I'm trying to make here is that while there's so much talk of media capture now, it is not actually a new phenomenon. That is the first point that I want to make. We've had media capture going back for many years. Now, media capture over the years has manifested itself in various forms. Who were the players in media capture? There was the government, mainly. It was the largest player. The corporate entities also sought to manipulate content of media outlets, but not to the same extent as government. Excuse me, please. Then there were the publishers themselves, in the case of the small publications such as Financial Gazette. And they tended to control the output of the organizations of the newspapers that they published. And there was widespread censorship. So media control manifested itself in the form of censorship, primarily censorship by government, censorship by the private owners of publications, and censorship even by the editors themselves in conformity with the policies of the owners of the publications that they edited. And you will be amazed that the journalists themselves, ourselves, we also tended to self-censor. Apparently in appreciation of the policies of the editorial policies of the publications for which we worked. So what I'm saying is all this was a form of capture, essentially. We had a situation where, as privately owned publications started to emerge in greater numbers, there was a calling for less control of media outlets. Now, going back to the early 90s, an organization emerged, which was formed by the journalists of the SADC region, called the Media Institute of Southern Africa, MISA, which operated through chapters in the respective members of the SADC organization. Now, MISA was set up to try and challenge the monopoly of governments in the Southern African region. Governments such as in those countries that I've already outlined, identified, governments, the government of President Mugabe, President Kaunda, President Banda in Malawi, the liberation governments, because in each and every case, in terms of the region, they enjoyed an effective monopoly, or to use our current term now, they enjoyed capture of the media. The emergence of MISA forestalled the emergence of, as we called them then, independent newspapers. I am reluctant these days to use the term independent. And in fact, I think it is falling out of favor in preference to the term privately owned newspapers. We had newspapers such as in Zambia, Fred Membe's Post. I think it was the first privately owned, or independent as we called it then, newspaper, which struggled to challenge the monopoly of President Kaunda's newspapers. We had Mechi in Namibia, sorry, in Botswana, the Namibian in Namibia, and a host of other newspapers. Now, with time, it is my belief that I think it is an accurate observation that with the emergence of the privately owned newspapers, governments felt the pressure on their own newspapers, because the independent newspapers landed with what I would call a bang. Fred Membe's Post, for instance, it became the largest selling newspaper in Zambia because it was unfettered, it was uncontrolled, it was uncaptured. Some will say, excuse me again. Some will say that, talking of capture, maybe it was captured by the owners, which can be a realism. Captured by Membe himself, maybe captured by those who put their money in his private newspaper. But all this, I am presenting all this in a bid to strengthen, reinforce my point that we've had capture of the media going way back. Now.
Okay, Mr. Nyarota, sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt, because you are left with about 2 minutes of your slot. But maybe on that point, no, you might want to say what's different now. Obviously, things are moving, things have been developing.
Right. I was reaching what I think is the highlight of my own presentation on the issue of capture. As we thought we were liberating the media in the case of Zimbabwe, from the clutches of the government. This is where Professor Moyo comes in now. Along came Professor Moyo at the turn of the century, when the privately owned media had come full force. And he made a very strong effort to capture the private media. And in my view, he failed. And as a result of that failure to capture the private media, there was a media war in the early years of the century in Zimbabwe, which was spearheaded by Professor Moyo himself on the part of government. He made a strenuous effort to subjugate the daily news, for instance, but failed. And in my opinion, thereafter, the capture by government, the effort to capture by government has become less forceful. But some will say that there are still evidence, or there are cases where it could be argued that they still capture of the government media outlets, for instance. But what I'm trying to say here is that the capture by government is less than it was during the time of Professor Moyo. Maybe it has become more subtle in the sense that there is less conflict, in the sense that there is less confrontation. But I would also say that it has become more difficult now for government to exercise control over the media. I mean, say over the publications, over radio broadcast, over the internet. In fact, it's virtually impossible now. But I made the point earlier that it's not only government that seeks to capture the media, but
you got a minute,
my concern is more to do with capture by government. I'm less worried about capture by a publisher, a private publisher, such as Trevor Ngube. I'm less worried by capture by Trevor Ngube than I am worried by capture by the Ministry of Information, because Trevor Ngube is a private publisher, and he knows the risks that he runs if he attempts to exert too much control on his publications, because sales will suffer. Well, his is a private investment, which performs on the basis of circulations. In respect of the Herald, for instance, government is not particularly worried because it does not survive on its publications for its own survival, which is the worrisome fact. Because
okay, can you be winding? Sorry, can you be winding up, Ms. Nyarot?
In conclusion, I would like to say that we discuss the issue of capture alongside the issue of control by government, going back to going back for decades.
Okay, so many thanks for that. There's, of course, you raised quite a number of very, very interesting points, but I would want to, Ms. Nyarota, to also draw your attention to one statement that you made when you said, unless I did quote you wrongly, when you said it's now a bit more difficult for government to control the media. But we subject that to later debate. Can I just take leave of your slot for now? And then go to Dumi Sanble. I hope you are there. I saw you were there. Dumi, you wrote quite extensively on Mediagate. As I said, that was when Central Intelligence took over, bought into the mirror, and then well, we know what happened. The rest is history. The mirror died. It's now as dead as a dodo. So you actually did report on that. You might want to give us your reflections to me on that, and then that's the first component of my question or my request to you. The second component is maybe you would want to shed some reflections on capture of the independent media. One thing I might want to say at this stage is like, we may not want to exactly name names, blah, 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 for ethical purposes. But it would be very important for you, to me, you are playing a very important role in the private media, the so-called independent media, by way of generating content into the public domain. So let's start with Mediagate, and then we go to, at a more general level, the independent media and capture. Sorry, to me, we can't hear you. Are you not muted? No, I'm not muted. Try to adjust your volume on the settings so that the audio is better, because we can hardly hear you.
Oh, yes, technology when I'm fair.
Is it any better?
It's too bad.
Oh, yes, technology fun.
No. I know technology a lot, doctor. Don't worry about that.
Thanks.
But is it better now? Is it audible?
It's better now. Not exactly the best, but it's better.
Yeah, but you see, what's surprising is that I can hear you. You are actually too loud for me on this side, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So try to be as loud as me.
I don't know whether it's... I don't know whether it's now it's audible so that I can go ahead.
Yeah, sure. You're good.
Okay. Essentially, I was just saying, I mean, the protocol staff, thanks to yourself, Dr. Mandaza, the convener, and of course to media colleagues who are part of the conversation. You already have framed me and asked me to zero in on a particular manifestation of media capture in the Zimbabwean situation. The story that we did sometime in 2005, 2006, which we then called Mediagate, is probably the best manifestation of media capture we have seen in Zimbabwe since independence, primarily because of the manner in which it was done, the motives through which it was done, and how it was executed. It's different from other forms of capture or their manifestations, because this was clandestine operation by the State Intelligence Service or the State Security Service in Zimbabwe, which is the Central Intelligence Organization, CIO. They had come up with a plan, and Dr. Mandaz obviously knows this because this operation was being done to take over his media group, to seize the media company or structures away from him. It became a big scandal in the sense that whereas we are aware of governments all over the world, in Zimbabwe in particular, intelligence services all over the world, they always do that, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in Britain, it's in Russia, it's in China, in South Africa. Of course, we know about the information gates, the scandal that rocked the Foster government in 1978, 79, when they spent lots of money, huge millions of rands, buying control, paying media organizations in order to influence the editorial and the content. So what the Zimbabwean CIO did, it is an operation. It was an operation that had parallels, that had precedents in other parts of the world. They sought to take over the Mirror, a group of newspapers, which was published by Dr. Mandaza, in order to deploy those assets in influencing the narrative in Zimbabwe, influencing media contents, influencing the political narrative, influencing the direction of public understanding of the national issues of the day. They put together resources through one of the biggest commercial banks here, started sending monies into the media operations and put their own people there. I'm not really going to go about how they did it, but it was, the capture was via putting some money, channeling some finances, and putting personnel right on the structures of the media organization, who seized control of the editorial structures to influence content behind Dr. Mandaza's back and behind other senior staff members of the Mirror and the Times back. And indeed, there were occasions when we later spoke to some of the colleagues who worked there, where they would even change headlines, interfere brazenly in order to deliver particular narratives on the politics of the day, particular content of stories in service of their own ulterior motives or the agenda, which is the CIO agenda, the political agenda of the Mugabe regime at the time. So that became one of those brazen interferences in trying to take editorial control. So basically, this, I will continuously refer to this if there are any other interesting anecdotes or atmospherics that people are interested in. But this launches me into the subject, which is basically media capture. Yes, as Geoff Nyarota was saying earlier, it's not really a new phenomenon, media capture. It has been there for as long as media existed, but it has continued to mutate, to change. It is dynamic, depending on the changes in the political circumstances, in the economic circumstances, in the media structures, how they are organized, controlled, and directed. Media capture continues to change, shift and change to suit the situation. In the Zimbabwean situation, we have had a phenomenon, I think Nyarota tried to trace part of the history of media structures in Zimbabwe. Most of the media structures in Zimbabwe, they were initially owned and controlled by the governments, the political elite of the day. Zim papers, of course, I know you did say it. I wonder we must not particularly speak about individuals, organizations, or people.
It's not a problem, really. I mean, because we need to be honest with each other. You know, this is the purpose, this is the philosophy behind the dialogue.
Okay. There will be examples here and there, but this is not meant to target any particular organizations or individuals. But yet at the same time, as journalists, as media people, and as members of the public, we must make it a habit that we don't censor ourselves when there's no need to do so. In other words, we can only be able to influence issues or discourse around ourselves and media practice, in this case, only if we are very honest, open, and also factual and truthful. Those things are very important. The history of Zim Papers speaks for itself. I mean, it was always an establishment media organization, right from its founding in colonial times in the 1890s. It was always successively passed on to the next government or the next ruling political elite of the time. It was the case then in the 1890s, throughout the turn of the 19th century, and indeed throughout the turn of the 20th century. That remains the case up to now. It is a group that was born captured and is still captured. No offense intended there. It's just the facts as they are. It's an establishment media organization, and therefore the political elites of the time, all the time, they seek to control Zim Papers, to deploy it to their political and policy purposes. The same applies to the state-owned broadcaster, ZBC is the same situation. It's always under the clutches or under the control of the powers that be, who seek to influence its editorial position and content. But that does not mean, it's not a case of bad cops, good cops. It's a very complex, nuanced situation in which capture straddles the media divide, if you call that, or just across the landscape. Private media organizations, they also suffer capture in various ways. And I think at this point it's also important to clarify what we mean by capture, so that we are speaking specifically about something that is much more well-defined. Basically, when we are talking about media capture, we are talking about a calculated and a premeditated steps, usually taken by let's say, governments, by powerful in order to contract, it can serve their own party good or the public interest. Achieved through, usually, it can be legislative, it can be both public advertising and private advertising. Advertising, politically linked ownership of private media. Once the
yes, to me, your bandwidth is a bit dead at the moment.
To deviate from its own. Okay.
But you can proceed. I'm going to give you 3 extra minutes.
Okay. Sorry about that. I mean, it's a pity that you can't hear me properly, but I was just winding up saying that we have in Zimbabwe now widening and expanding media capture. Was initially, now it is also established organizations in Zimbabwe right now. They are clearly under the influence and the capture of the powers that be. How do we know that? Other than knowing the facts from internally, we also can see that by their editorial output. You look at various media outlets where they used to be positioned. In other words, their original mandate set by themselves, declared to their readers or audiences or the public, and what they're actually doing now. You can see that there is serious interference. That is in terms of their editorial positions, their content output, the nuances of how they cover the issues of the day. You can see the footprints or fingerprints of capture in those media outlets. And in the process, which is my last point, when capture happens, as we are seeing it today in Zimbabwe, that delivers a fatal blow to independent journalism, which is what we all desire to see. In other words, we all desire to see editorial control under journalists. In other words, media organization, it doesn't matter which media organization that is. It's not about binaries. Any media organizations that comes through to serve the public interest or the public good, it must therefore have an independent editorial policy, whether it's Zim Papers, whether it's ZBC, whether it's Alpha Media Holdings, whether it's ANZs, it doesn't matter. Whether it's online media organization, they need to have independent editorial policy in order to serve the common good well. But that is not what we are seeing in Zimbabwe right now. We're seeing a lot of pressures on the independent media. And of course, these pressures are worsened by the issues of the changing business and financial models, the impact of internet or technology companies and advertising industry or news media. And of course, the conflict of interest that arise. I'll leave it at that. Hopefully you manage to salvage something.
Yeah. We actually did, and I'm hoping
you've been complaining that you can't.
No. You actually, the majority of your input was audible. It was just for a slight moment. But thanks a lot for that, to me. I'm particularly happy that towards the end, even though you didn't say it in detail, you did talk about in the case of the independent media, the privately owned media, you did talk about commerce coming in, commerce doing some things to capture the media. And this is, I think, one thing we hope to get expanded as we get the other panelists on board, because the economics of the media plays a very important role in media capture. Media capture thrives where there's vulnerability among media practitioners. In Zimbabwe, we all know for the past 21 years, they've not been working properly. So this is, I think, one voice we would need to hear, whereby we are now linking the economic performance, the country's economic performance to the media and media capture. Okay, so thanks a lot to me. I know today is your D-Day. I'm very grateful that you managed to avail yourself for this particular conversation. But hang on, because I think more interesting perspectives are coming on board. Can I confirm whether Tish is now on? If Tish, you are on, can you please then come on board? you're coming from a public media. You know, you've heard what Joffre said, and you've heard what Dumisane said regarding the public media. So you have experiences and perspectives and testimonies to share from the public media. Can you just come in, Tish, if you are there?
Okay.
Thanks, Tish.
Thank you very much, Tawanda. Thank you very much, Tawanda. I apologize. I had some power failure here, and I hope you can see me for now.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, so first of all, I think I would like to the video to maintain the quality of audio on your side. But I'm sure the presentation by Jeff, the first part that I had before, I to agree with him by and large that the issue of media capture is not new. But I think I will say that it's not new. It's not a neologism. State capture in itself is just a neologism to the extent that it's a term that now it's a term that people are getting it as a buzzword and possibly people are getting a lot of projects around that. So to the extent that that is true, and we know that alongside journalism, we know that there are a number of interests
Unfortunately, your bandwidth is playing up now.
What then differs, I think, is the extent to which those interests are revealed or unknown. So, so I think, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's better now.
Tawanda, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure. It was going a little bit better now.
Okay. So I was just giving an overview. Okay, yes. So I was giving an overview that the issue of media is this term, which is media capture, which is just.
Yeah, it's really getting bad. We seem to have lost Tish there. I think we really need to get his perspectives on media capture, especially coming from the public public sector. As bandwidth, Stanley, is Stanley in? If Stanley is in, then my question is, what is your experience or experiences, Stan, as somebody coming from the private media in the context of media capture? What testimonies do you have to share with us? What manifestations of media capture? I'm not getting any response from Stanley Gama. But I'm just hoping that you would be able to come on board. In the meantime, I think as Tish is trying to fix his bandwidth, we can then hop over to Patience. Patience, Rima, you coming in as a discussion. And I'm sure you've been watching and listening into. You just give us your reflections, because to be here in the context of media monitoring, because media monitoring is about tracking media content and then trying to unpick the trends and patterns. So Patience on media capture, and also as a discussant, the other reflections that have been made by prior panelists. So it seems like we've lost Patience too. If that is the case, because we are reaching the dead end in terms of
no, Patience is there. She's in the room.
Primary presentations and stuff.
She's in the room. Patience is in the room.
So is she muted? Patience, if you can hear me, please give us a shout. Just take care to find out if you are muted. Okay, she's in the room. As we wait for her, let's just, yeah, she's not responding. As we wait for her, I'm going to give you a call and confirm from here what's happening. As we wait for her, I think let's just do some bit of throwback.
Brother Tawanda, she's saying, can you unmute here? Patience is requesting if you can unmute here as the host.
You must unmute yourself. Michael, can you unmute Patience?
Okay.
Unmute her.
I can't unmute her. I can only request that she unmutes herself. She's the only one who
can unmute herself. Can she unmute herself? Oh my God.
Okay, so as we wait for Patience, I am confident she will manage it. As we wait for Patience, let's just do some throwbacks. Anybody from the floor who would want to make some reflections on what has already been said at the core level, but even outside that, any contribution that we could have contributors. You can raise your hand and then make you talk. If so far there's nobody from the floor who's got a reflection to make, can we, Tish, are you back? Hello, Tish.
Oh, yeah. I'm back.
How can you say there's no one who's raised again? We have raised our hands.
Can you hear me properly? Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me properly now?
Okay, fine.
All right. Okay. Moderator, I'm here. So I was just reflecting on state capture or many colleague Nyarota said. What is different different now, and I tend to agree with him, is that is the nomenclature. But what definitely and what to ultimately define media capture is that whereas we have various commercial, political, government, and so forth interests, what then defines is whether it's legitimate, the demands they make, are they formal or formal, are they public interest, or they are for private, personal, business, political, and what we're seeing even today in Zimbabwe, even tribal. We can also even think about civil society also capturing the media. We can, I think even the other typology that I thought in my mind are these forces in or unseen. Are they declared or, undeclared? So generally, I think the issue, and it can be seen in it also means different things to people, it's in the context of that, I think in Zimbabwe right now, so much as the term is gaining currency, we have not been favored with empirical evidence of such capture. Issues that are in the public domain now consist largely of speculation, consist largely of rumors and so forth. So you also mentioned at the outset favored with, reflections on this, or at least empirical evidence. So there is a gap generally to show us, the extent to which media capture manifests itself. But at the moment, the issue is still out there. People need to discover what really is media capture and what really it is not. But there are obvious cases that possibly some people might want to think about.
We once again lost. We hope you'll be able to come back.
Can you hear me?
I think you was going at a very good tangent there.
His connection is very bad.
Now, Dr. Arsero. Okay, so Tish, if you can hear me, maybe you can adjust. This is Zimbabwe. You can adjust your position and try to find out whether you can get a better connection.
Yes.
But in the meantime, what we're going to do is let's get Dr. Arsero to make some reflections on what
thanks, Nkomatawanda. I'm sure there is some intrusion. Thank you very much.
You can put it on hold. Let's hear from Alexander.
Thank you very much, Mkoma Tawanda. I tend to concur with what Mkoma Joff said in as much as capture is concerned. But I think in the current context, we have to typologize what we mean by capture. Because outside the realms of capture, we also have the manifestations of a commissariat journalism across the divide. The powers that be no longer need to capture the media, so to speak, because in the newsrooms, we now have political commissars. So I wouldn't want to characterize that as capture per se, but we have certain people play in the newsrooms masquerading as journalists, whereas they are not. Then there is also something that should...
Sorry, Dr. Rusero, before you go any further, this is a very important point. When you see, because in terms of the typology or taxonomy of media capture, you were going to look at indirect media capture and very overt media capture. When you see an editor, when you see a journalist on the shop floor, either self-censoring because there's soft censorship, or or they've been deliberately assigned to that desk of doing whatever they're doing. Is that not capture still in itself? No, because if you have journalists being paid or journalists being manipulated to report in certain directions, can we not call it media capture at a direct level? Not even implicit, but direct level.
Yeah, at times it's self-deployment, Tawanda, is what my brother Geoff said. We also have self-censorship. It's also brazen self-deployment. This is self-deployment by journalists where they just deploy themselves at the forefront, maybe for certain ulterior motives or certain intentions or gains that they target, and not necessarily capture. So you find that the whole idea of capture has to do with power. The whole idea of capture has to do with power. Outside the capture, we can talk of interference of the editorial. But when we are talking about media capture, the agenda, the objective here is the political elite. They want to shape a certain narrative. They want to consolidate, sustain, and perpetuate their stay in power. And one of the ways to do so is through capturing the media to control the narrative, to be in charge of the narrative that has got, that is silent about criticizing them, that glorifies the narrative that sees no evil, hears no evil, etc. But we also have a lot in terms of self-censorship. I like to call it commissariat journalism. We also have self-deployment. Journalists who are over-enthusiastic, they deploy themselves to fight for a cause, even which they do not know what that amounts to. Thank you. Those are my few remarks.
Okay, still on you, Dr. Sel. You remember when we started off this conversation and I was giving context to the dialogue, I did mention something to the effect that scholarly research lacks energy in terms of unpacking media capture. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, but I do believe something is happening. In the beginning of the meeting, I saw Mkoma Wallace, Professor Wallace Chuma. I think they are better placed. They are well-accomplished researchers. But as much as also issues to do with capture are becoming topical now, then you will find that research will also manifest in the current. In the background, there were issues of standards, issues of media control, media ownership, regulation, etc. Research also moves with the trends. Unfortunately, in Zimbabwe, research trails behind issues. Under normal circumstances, it's research that should set the agenda, but not in Zimbabwe, because in Zimbabwe, research is desperately underfunded. We do not value research in general and media research in particular.
That's fine. And then you also talk about the political elite. For you, it seems like preponderantly media capture is done by the political elite. What about commerce?
The commerce, they have various ways to influence the media, which does not necessarily amount to capture, because the commerce, they do so by way of trying to protect or shield their interests. When we are talking about capture, the agenda here is power. It's a power agenda. So when we want to look at capture, look in no other way than looking at the powers that be, your cartels, their connection to the political elite. It's all about money game. Capture is money game. Commerce, they have certain ways they can do so through adverts, suffocating adverts, etc. But the topical context of media capture, which is under spotlight in this debate, must have something to do with power. You look at Willowgate scandal, how it rolled heads, how the editor was unceremoniously removed and kicked upstairs. That's media capture. Outside that, the business personnel, they can intrude in the media in various ways of adverts, marketing, etc. Capture is about the powerful elite, the political elite, and their greed and their loot. They do not want to be disturbed in their process of accumulation, pillaging, and plundering state resources by way of some nuisance publications or nuisance reports, which tends to actually disturb their projects. It's a power project. Look at the current scheme of things when we are talking about media capture in Zimbabwe. The capture points to the executive. The capture points to the Mnangagwa government, which is now like an octopus dipping in each and every respective media sector in Zimbabwe. So if you have a private player investing or Delta putting money in a certain newspaper, that's not a capture. Capture is about power. It's about a political power, so to speak, at least from my own perspective, as Alexander was here.
That's fine. I don't know whether everybody's concurrent with Dr. on capture being political power capture, never commercial power capture. But Commerce seems to always be getting into the whole matrix at the end of the day. Teach, are you now okay? You might want to respond to what Dr. Sero said.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I tend to disagree with Mukoma Alex on the narrow application of capture. I would like to believe that it can be as broad as there are so many varied interests there are so many levels, there are so many uniform. You might want to show power and so forth. So I don't think we necessarily have to narrow it, because there are so many so many interests that are competing to use the media illegitimately and informally, and unseen, people hiding behind certain
Tish, you might want
forces in the media. So to the extent that he is correct in saying that, I think there are so many dimensions of excuse me?
I was saying you might want to give it a pause because your bandwidth is going haywire once again. But we'll come back to you definitely. Kojo Paris, can you please come in and give us your own input on this one?
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks a lot. By way of background, I spent many years in banking in Zimbabwe, and even though I don't live in Zimbabwe anymore, I still am involved in various affairs there. I can say without a doubt that Zimbabwean media has never not been captured, and the narrow definition that the professor suggests is perhaps not very helpful. Be it the NGO civil society sector, which is predominantly funded from overseas with a particular agenda, or local business interests who directly have very specific interests, or sometimes themselves are vehicles for other political interests. And of course, the government. I mean, the government in every country wants to manage the media. There's nothing necessarily surprising about that. And then I think it's a little bit strange to hear this discussion about whether or not there's capture in Zimbabwean media. I mean, I would have thought the question would be: is the nature of capture useful for development and for the progression of positive values in the society? I don't know why we're still even debating whether or not it's captured. And the other
if I may just interject, Koyo, if I may just interject, and I think when I was starting off this conversation, we did talk about the undesirability of media capture, because I did say media capture has got implications across the board. This is not the kind of media capture would never love. And I think there's unanimity in that regard to say there's bad media capture.
Yeah, and let me just finish by saying, I think also some of it has to do with the structure of the media. And if we only regard the media as we seem to be in this discussion around the traditional newspapers, etc., we miss the fact that the social media and Twitter, etc., are becoming even more influential than the traditional media forms. And capture of those spaces is much more difficult and provides lots of avenues for the sorts of discussions and discourses which are required for development. So in summary, I don't know that there's any dispute that either by civil society, by private individuals or government, that traditional media in Zimbabwe is captured. And there are lots of opportunities across social media for a new discourse. Thanks.
That's fine. That's fine, because you see this component about, I was actually going to ask around the issue of social media. It's a very good thing that you are bringing it on board, because it seems like we trained our attention mostly on the formal or mainstream media as being captured. But obviously, I think it's also grounded to say there have been attempts to capture or manipulate or control. I'm not going to talk about ownership, because ownership of the social media, yes, now if you talk about Facebook, about Google, there's implicit ownership to a very large extent of social media there. But in Zimbabwe, you have seen some attempts to control the social media, whether that's going to be through a legislation or the implementation of laws that don't exist, like we saw, was it last year or late last year, but one, I mean early last year, but one, when you get the media being blocked out or blacked out. We saw the same thing happening in Zambia during the elections, and it seems like African governments are increasingly taking to that strategy of breaking out the media, the social media during election time for whatever reason. This is, I don't know whether we would give that a typology of media capture or it's just legislation or what. But maybe just in passing, you might want to send a comment on that one.
Is that question for me?
Yeah, that's for you.
Yeah, listen, I think if we had this conversation 10 years from now, we'd be talking about, the same sorts of narratives about control. The fact is that social media is a lot more open now. The people who own the media spaces certainly not interested too much in Zimbabwe, but this will likely change. So most social media now does present opportunities for the sort of free flow of discourse, which many people believe is necessary for a progressive developmental agenda.
That's fine. Thanks a lot for that. Lamek, can you just briefly come in, and then maybe we'll try teach once again. No, teach, you have to be on hold, and I'll go to patience.
Oh, thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to talk. My name is Lamek Mahachi. I merely joined this session as a concerned citizen of Zimbabwe. However, I'm very much concerned with the manner in which the media has been captured by the current government. Dr. Rusero could have put it more prudent when he pointed out that the powers that be will always make sure that nothing they consider to militate against their interest is ever published. We have had journalists who have been hounded and put in prison for exposing the rot that we all see. There is also the so-called state media, the Herald and the television. It's all about praise. There's no one who interrogates the people whom we all know are very corrupt. Nothing is aired on ZTV. Nothing is written in the Herald or the Chronicle. The Chronicle was good immediately after independence when my brother Geoff Nyarota was editor there. And he actually exposed the most scandalous of all scandals, the mother of all scandals at Willowvale then. And we could also read stories about Paweni then. But ever since everybody started putting their hands in the cookie jar, they promulgated a law which muzzled the press. They hounded Nyarota out of the Chronicle and put their own things. I mean, sorry to say things, their own people. So it is an open secret that is, the state, the media in Zimbabwe is captured. There is nothing, we don't need to hide the fact. It's a fact. It's captured, period. Thank you very much for letting me talk my mind.
Thanks a lot, Lamek. I think that is very important. Some kind of a summary on what the other guys have said, and then of course, you're just giving it a pedestal. Thanks a lot. There's a question that says, what agenda does civil society have? Well, I think it's assuming that it's in the context of media capture. You can't make these blanket statements. If there's anybody from civil society or anybody who's prepared to be talking about civil society and media capture, then they're welcome to come in. But the point is, when I started, I said there's less energy on the part of the media, civil society, the legislature, and the scholarly research to converse around media capture. So if there's anybody from civil society here who is prepared to be talking about what civil society is doing to unpack media capture, they're most welcome. But at this stage, let me just go to Patience. Patience is now on board. Patience Zirima. Patience, can you just come in? I'm assuming that you've been listening to the inputs from the other participants, panelists, as well as guys on the show floor. What do you have to say? What are your reflections on media capture, especially from the context of media monitoring? Well, it seems Patience is too a bit evasive at the moment. Patience, if you are hearing me, we were looking towards.
She's gone. She's not there.
She's no longer there. Yeah, because my screen is not showing. It's not showing that. But I did talk to her on the phone. And she said she was on board. So let's just rewind, throw back. Teach. Let's see if you are now better.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Thank you, Tawanda. I think there is an important intervention that you made around the social media. But I think you misdirected yourself a bit in talking about the regulatory framework or the regulatory efforts by government, to regulate that necessarily constitute capture. But what we have seen on the social media spaces is that there are certain individuals, certain social media accounts, certain influencers that are being paid or deploying themselves to forward or to do certain things. I think
you can call them trolls, right?
Media capture. For example, if we years back, a couple years, and one politician edging his constituents to fight within the social media spaces. right? And from there, we see the development of an army or even bots, you know, that push a certain narrative. I'm sure in that that would constitute media capture. We also yes that are either encouraged, sponsored, or funded, you know, by forces that are seen or unseen, you know, to push sex. And today there are even some comedians, some comedians who do skits. There are some comedians who do certain political narrativization. I think that they are not doing that innocently. And we know that, you know, some of them are actually paid by, you know, certain forces. So I'm sure that would constitute capture. But I would not really believe that if government were to regulate, it would constitute capture. Powers to regulate those spaces, not least because there is a whole range of things that can happen within the cyberspace. So I also want to mention that the issue of capture does not necessarily, I'm sure I want to re-emphasize, I don't think it necessarily have to be political only. It can have social, it can have undesirable social ends or political idea were to be dominated by a certain tribe or ethnic grouping, you know, pour money there, you know, or push certain tribal agenda. That would be political or social. It's broad. It's continuously manifesting.
It's so bad, man.
It's very dynamic.
Right. Yeah, unfortunately,
that would be all
it's going at a tangent again.
Apologies for that. Yeah.
No, it's not even your problem. It's a Zimbabwean problem. Okay, fine. At this stage, let me just hop over to Dumi. Dimzamle, you want to say something, right?
Yeah, basically, I want to just make an intervention in relation to what Rusero was saying. Although, broadly speaking, capture, I mean, the ultimate goal in most cases, that is always a political agenda linked to political power. But capture is certainly, I have no doubt about it, broader than that. They can be, media organizations can be captured for commercial interest. And it does happen quite a lot. Just look in the context of the local media, there are certain big companies that you will never read anything negative about them. Not that media is there to write negativity, but simply because no one is willing to investigate them, to cover them critically, to look at their books, to look at their performance in the market, because they are big advertisers in the media. That essentially end up constituting capture because the editorial is captive to the commercial interest of those organizations. I want to refer you to a report that was done last year in the run-up to World Press Freedom Day conference, that is 2020. UNESCO produced a new study in the World Trends in Freedom of Expression and Media Development series. They produce this series annually, looking at the state of the media globally and in certain selected countries. The report basically discusses the most urgent threats to editorial independence in the media and journalistic integrity around the world. That report, I recall, it was called Reporting Facts, Free from Fear or Favor. It provided the most comprehensive overview of the ways in which independent editorial policies are being undermined by political forces. That is
political external actors from the organizations, media organizations, and how editorial independence is further undermined by decision makers within the internal structures of media organizations or individuals who are influential within media organizations. So media capture is various manifestations. And again, I want to proceed further to say, to address another point that was raised by Tish moments ago, that regulatory control doesn't constitute media capture. It does, of course.
It does.
The political elite take over independent regulatory structures to control them, to direct them, particularly in the issue of licensing. Who gets a license and who doesn't get a license? I'll give you an example of the recent 6 television, new television stations that were issued, those 6 licenses. I've repeatedly pointed out this, as many other people have done, that those licenses, we all know, everybody who follows current affairs in this country does know that those licenses were issued to individuals or organizations that are willing currently to do the bidding for the current regime in power. That's not a secret. So what is happening is that the regime is trying to capture the media. There are various forms or methods of entry into that space of capture that they use. They can use money to capture certain media organizations. They can use political co-option, which is a method that we've seen. We've seen publishers being co-opted. I mean, it's pretty obvious that media exists primarily to check on the exercise of power,
Sure.
To see how those in the space of power use that power. In other words, media is there to check various manifestations of abuse of power. But then if publishers become part of the executive, then their ability to perform that function is crippled. That is a manifestation of capture by political elites. So regulatory control is another powerful weapon of media capture that we actually have in Zimbabwe. This is no longer theoretical media capture discourse. Actually, what is happening in this country. And then further, public advertising, it's used to control, because capture, we're talking about undue influence on editorial and therefore on content, and therefore narratives of what is happening in the country. So public advertising is deployed towards capture by determining which media outlets should public enterprises, for instance, advertise with. ZESA, NRZ, and all these other public entities where their advertising is deployed. It can be used as an instrument to capture editorials of particular organizations and therefore influence their editorial content, influence what they put out there. Because when advertising is used, that it then influences the financial model of that organization. And that organization knows how it is surviving. In other words, understanding its own political economy, its internal political economy, it will then deploy its editorial coverage and the content that it generates in a particular way to suit agendas of those who are sustaining it. So there are various forms, there are various structures that are actually being used right now to capture editorial structures of organizations, if not capture them totally to make them captive, but certainly unduly influence them in a manner that still manifests itself as capture. That's the point that I want to make, that intervention. But that report, if colleagues can get hold of that, it's a very useful report because it does go into detail about the phenomenon of media capture around the world. But in the Zimbabwean case, we can see brazen political interference, co-option. We can see a use of advertising, public advertising to do so. We can see taking over of regulatory structures. We saw, I mean, in the story that you asked me to talk about Mediagate, that was direct funneling of public funds from the state security into the media in order to take over the media. So there are many forms and manifestations of media capture that we're sitting with, we're dealing with, we're experiencing, and that is escalating. They are intensifying that, this current government, and that will get more worse as we go to the next election in 2023.
Many thanks to me for that, especially because you are agreeing with my own stance, relating to those things. But that also flies in the face of Dr. Rusero, because Dr. Rusero was, as Teach says, a bit narrowed in terms of his conception of media capture. But I think media capture goes beyond the political elite. It expands across the board. But what I'm still not hearing is about private commerce. To me, you are talking about a public commerce. But private commerce, is it not a factor to reckon with in terms of, like, in the context of media capture?
No, I did refer to that. Right from the beginning, I've been referring to that. That's a commercial interests, be they public commercial interests, be they private commercial interests, they influence unduly how media organizations are run. That is their editorial policies, that is their content, that is how they deal with they engage their audiences, and indeed that is how they contribute to public discourse and shape the narratives of what's happening in a particular country. So it does include the private sector. The private sector is even worse when it comes to that. Our experience in this area is that the private sector, you dissuaded us from mentioning certain companies, but look, I'll refer you again to a report so that you can see, because it was empirical. There is a report that was done. I can see Professor Jonathan Moy is not here, but if he was there, the report he commissioned in 2013, it spoke to these issues. Because journalists, media managers, readers, audiences, and the companies themselves, that is the corporate sector, there were interviews done about that. It was found that there are certain big companies in this market which are never written by the media because they are the leading advertisers. And those media organizations need them to be able to do the basics, in other words, to pay their salaries and just pay their costs. In other words, to have operating costs, to pay the basic costs, they need those companies. And therefore, they do not cover those companies' excesses in the markets, how they deal with their customers, how they engage their audiences. It's never covered because they are the ones who are sustaining. They control the political economy of the media in this country. And therefore, they have captured the media in that sense. The editorial policies, they've captured editorial departments of the media. Because in order to capture media, you need to capture its editorial. Because otherwise, if you don't do that, the content will not reflect and be in sync with your agenda, which is what you need to do. When you want to capture an organization, you seek to influence how they write, what they write, and what they put out to the audiences, and how they put in what format. In other words, the packaging of the content and its distribution, because the influence of capture cascades throughout the value chain, not just at one point of the value chain. It goes through, penetrates, permeates the whole value chain, and therefore you end up with the media organizations that are simply doing the bidding of particular powerful interests. Those powerful interests, they can be political, they can be commercial, they can be individuals who are organized in order to influence a particular media organization or a group of media organizations. And then just briefly on the issue of the online journalism, the digital journalism. Digital journalism, it can also be captured, but because most of the time, it's not really properly institutionalized and organized. What it does, it plays a disruptive role. When the big media organizations, they are captured, people then tend to try to find alternatives, like what's happening in the Zimbabwean market today. A number of news makers or sources, they've realized that the conventional media organizations, the big media organizations, there are certain things they don't write. So what do? They then look for alternative platforms. This is where we come in startups. They begin to see that certain things we have had in our short lifespan right now, for instance, as the newsrooms, we have had so many sources, walk-ins now. who come and say, I've been to all media organizations in this country for months. Dr. Mandaza can be a witness to this, obviously, without exposing the source, because only recently one source came. He had been all over the place to media organizations. They were refusing to write that story. You know why? Because it concerned a big telecoms company in this country, which is a big advertiser to the conventional media. That story was not written until we wrote it. What did that tell you? That's
I hear you on that, to me. Unfortunately, I would have to cut you short. I would have to cut you short on that. But your deposit is very, very immaculate now, so to speak. I would have wanted to go back to Dr. Rusero for some rejoinder, but in the interest of time, because we are left with less than a minute now, I think we just need to leave it there. But from where I'm standing now, I'm just going to say that this has been very robust. The inputs from everybody, whether the panelists or the show floor. Unfortunately, we couldn't get patients on board. Were just like marvelous. So at this stage, let me just like go back to Dr. Mandaza so that he can give us some summarizing statement on what we've been doing today in this particular dialogue.
No, I won't try and summarize it all. I think it was an interesting discussion, and I think the interventions by Rusero and Mulea more or less constituted the debate, if I may say so. And I think that he summarized it very well. That state capture cannot be, media capture cannot be confined to government alone. One must look at the power of commerce. And in this country, and the example he gave just now, which I'm familiar with, is legion, because very few media houses dare tussle with some of these big companies. It's often easier to tussle with government, and the private media is doing that a very good job in that respect. But you don't find the same kind of interrogation of these big companies that control our economy. And so I think that we be good to return to this debate at some stage. And I think the point made is very clear. The idea of independent media long packed that concept. We have to look at various influences, and there will always be influences of the media. So I'd like to thank you, Tawanda, and your organization, Information for Development Trust, for partnering with us and putting on the agenda a very important subject. We have not exhausted the discussion, but I think we can come back to it someday. It is recorded, it's on Facebook, on YouTube, and it will be transcribed into a policy statement, a policy brief, reflecting some of the main points made during this discussion. So I'd like to thank you again and to remind you that next week we have a book launch, remembering Mugabe, his politics, his life, his ideology, and with the occasion also to discuss the nature of ZANU-PF during Mugabe's time, post the coup, and what it will look like as we go towards 2023 and beyond. So we invite you next Thursday, Policy Dialogue. We'll have the editors of the book, that is Richard Maumva and his colleagues, and we'll have discussants such as Sam Chia, Miles Tendi, Fei Chung, and Chipo Dendere. That's next Thursday. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, good night.
So cheers, guys.
Kaina komi moto ona